Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to SCSP's AI Plus Space Summit. Please take your seats and silence your phones. For our next session, titled Ensuring Supply Chain Security, please welcome Brandon Daniels, CEO of Exiger, for a fireside chat moderated by Chip Usher, Senior Advisor at SCSP.
Welcome. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Chip Usher, and I spent a career working at the Central Intelligence Agency. And in the intelligence world, we know well that some of the most dangerous threats are the ones we cannot see. But today, as we think about autonomous satellites and AI-driven orbital missions, the threats aren't just physical, they're digital. And oftentimes, those threats are buried deeply in our supply chains. So here to talk about that, we have the perfect guest. I am joined by Mr. Brandon Daniels, the CEO of Exiger. Brandon has spent much of his career using technology to illuminate risks that others miss. And so today we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about the space industry and the supply chains for them. And Brandon, we're so glad that you're here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chip. And it's great to be here. I love the venue. The setup is wild. It's great.
It's a little different for us. It's like theater in the round. It's great.
Yeah. Just let me know if anything's happening behind me. Watch my sex.
No, it's a huge screen.
Good.
So let's start. Can you briefly describe Exiger's role in helping federal and corporate clients safeguard their supply chains? What capabilities does Exiger bring to bear? What's the technology that you all use?
When you said it at the beginning that I've spent my career turning the sort of invisible into visible, that's what we do. Think about us like a set of diagnostic tools for your supply chain. We're the CT, we're the X-ray, we're the blood pressure cuff, and we're the doctor, helping you to understand exactly what's going on in your supply chain. The first piece of that is radical transparency. And the way that we do that is we utilize artificial intelligence and the world's largest knowledge asset that we have built over the last 10 years. And that's been built through partnerships, that's been built through acquisitions. We've done 5 acquisitions in the last 2 years alone of data companies, so we've been really busy. So we've been buying companies and data sets that are inherently proprietary. They've been invoice processing. They've been processing all of the NSNs that are being purchased by GSA or DLA or whatever. And what we have been doing is utilizing artificial intelligence to string together those sets of inherent relationships so that when we have an NSN, an MPN, like a microelectronic, for instance, or we get a drawing, a schematic, a technical data package of an assembly or a sub-assembly, we can take that and we can take all of the characteristics and we can say, okay, I know at the top here, you're giving me this semiconductor. Well, I know below that, I've got a few manufacturers. I know that I'm using these specific assembly test lines. I'm using these specific wafer fabs. And then the brilliant thing about supply chains is everybody thinks that they are these expanding triangles. They're these big pyramids. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of suppliers down at the base. So you're never going to be able to understand what is going on in the supply chain. They're actually a series of diamonds. And so we've built into our AI those inherent points in the diamond. So even if you've got multiple suppliers for a specific fastener that's necessary for space flight, for a satellite, it's going to come down and it might require magnesium casting. Well, there are only 3 AS9100 magnesium casting companies in the United States, and we can figure out which one you're using. So what we do is we map that supply chain to get radical visibility. Then the easy part happens. We geolocate all of those facilities, those companies, those special processors that are in that supply chain, and then we monitor those companies and those sites for anything that could happen: sanctions, export control issues, trade issues, disruptions, natural disasters. Like, we knew 3 weeks in advance that our IV fluid supply chains for our hospitals, that they were going to be disrupted by Hurricane Helene 3 weeks before Baxter did. So what we do is then we monitor for risk, and then finally we analyze that supply chain, and this is where the doctor part comes in, to basically help you to restore resilience. So, for the Army right now, we're working on Class 9 and Class 7 parts. Well, there are a lot of parts where we just have self-inflicted wounds. Like, we've got 900-day, administrative and production lead times. Well, a lot of those are because we have out-of-date mil specs, out-of-date testing procedures, and we're not utilizing the most advanced capabilities for printing, casting, forging, on those kinds of parts. So we actually help to sort of proactively say, hey, these are all the things that you don't know where obsolesced are. You're sort of flying without engines 30,000 feet in the sky, and this is how we can solve it.
Fantastic. And if you haven't had a chance to see Exiger's tech stack, I highly recommend it. It's a really cool program. So let's talk about the space industry. And as you look across the space industry and the space tech stack, both federal programs and private industry, what are some of the critical supply chain nodes that you're focused on? How vulnerable are our space supply chains to disruption, and how resilient do you find them?
Yeah, so the first time we started to illuminate space supply chains was back in 2020. We were looking at M-code and the infrastructure to actually supply to the military that custom proprietary signal to give global positioning in a more secure way. And as we were illuminating the supply chain, we saw a series of things that are still true today, right? Front-end systems were incredibly fragile. So like RF systems that allow you to conduct positioning, that allow you to have sensors, the actual guidance systems operate, that there was incredible fragility there. And when you kind of dive down a layer deeper, you start to see gallium arsenide dependence, and you start to see gallium dependence on China. The second thing that we started to see was, okay, it's not just these high-end advanced chips, it's also hydrazine and propulsion materials that are becoming heavily dependent on China feedstock or China processing, or even in a lot of original sort of satellite systems that still require repair and have demand and sustainment drawdown. You saw 10 nanometer plus chips that were impacted by, for instance, the Russia invasion of Ukraine, as all of our neon capabilities went dry when those three companies went out of business. And so we started to see these really critical, concentrated supply chain nodes in the microelectronics space. But then we also saw critical requirements from a sort of special processes perspective and materials perspective in things like titanium, in other critical minerals that were being mined not in China but had been recently purchased and owned by China. So we were seeing the components, the parts, the technology that was concentrated in specific areas. But then the other interesting thing was we started to see specific adversarial attack on the supply chain. So as low Earth orbit satellite companies were going bankrupt, you'd see assets being purchased by adversaries.
Yeah.
we were looking at research papers. So we did a DeepSeek analysis looking at all of the research papers, internet activity, internet traffic, and then we compile about 1.7 trillion data points a day from global repos, and we saw in that research space more internet traffic, more research traffic, more terms related to U.S. Satellite missions, and specifically at that point, M-code, coming out of Hong Kong and China than coming out of the United States.
That's amazing.
And so we saw, oh my goodness, there's sort of not just this sort of deep supply chain dependency, there's this economic attack vector, and then there's clearly this research entanglement and consistent cyber penetration attack that's occurring.
I think you've, in talking about critical minerals, have described it aptly as the silent war.
Yeah.
Right? So what is it that we can do to protect? I'm thinking here particularly of critical minerals, like gallium, germanium. They're essential for radiation hardening of electronics, solar arrays in space. What are some of your findings leading you to as to what we can do to protect these supplies?
Yeah. I mean, so you're right, it's a silent war, and China has weaponized the periodic table, right? And we've been screaming this from the rooftops for a while. I mean, I remember when Jen Santos was at Industrial Based Policy back in Trump 1, and I remember going to an event with her and I having like an hour conversation on gallium stockpiling and GaN needs back then, and like not a lot has changed, right? So there is a silent war, there is weaponization of the periodic table. The one thing that's really nice for space-specific technologies, in certain areas, like in power converters, we actually have alternatives, like you have, usually GaN and SiC are complementary, but in certain areas of power conversion, you can actually have them, you can design around either one. And so the United States actually has an incredibly healthy SiC, silicon carbide industrial base. But then when you look at the other critical minerals that are necessary, you mentioned gallium, you mentioned germanium, you mentioned antimony, but you also have to have dysprosium, and you also have to have samarium and all of these other things that China also set up export controls around. When you look at that supply chain, there is a unique opportunity for recycling and for cyclicality in that supply chain. One of the things that, looking at the size of this stage, it would take about this much gallium to supply all of our microelectronics in the United States. This much gallium, right? And the fact is, we can collect that from e-waste. And so, gallium, germanium, antimony, they're not like, big bulk use critical minerals.
Right.
They are extremely critical, but very rare, sparsely used materials. Like, the reason why you use GaN is because you're trying to stop bit flips from happening when you're up in space and everything's getting pounded with radioactivity.
Right.
The amount that we need is not a huge amount. So there's this unique opportunity for actually recycling. And then there's also unique opportunities to source from Canada and Australia if we can get offset or offtake agreements, right there. And then there's also an opportunity in the United States. I mean, I think Rio Tinto has even started looking at doing some of the processing and manufacturing here domestically. So, look, there's a real problem that China has the ability to cut off and choke almost all of our critical minerals tomorrow. And it's not, it's not just what is processed, refined, or mined in China. The more important piece is that China will own the supply chains of the future in all minerals by having extraterritorial debt burden in countries that are trying to become major exporters of natural resources. Zambia plans to be the third largest copper producer by 2030. The third largest copper producer in the world, maybe even the second if the South American mines continue to dwindle. The entire infrastructure is owned by China. China built out all of the dams, built them to a low regulatory standard, let them break, poured acid into 200 miles of river, and then Zambia had to borrow money from China to clean it up. Like, this is a continuously deepening issue, and it is an extraterritorial power, not just am I buying from China question.
So let's explore China a little bit more closely, because we know that the People's Liberation Army plays a big role with their private industry in all sorts of sectors. How do you view that in the space world? I mean, obviously they must be very deeply involved with launch, but what about commercial satellites? Even manned missions, other orbital tech.
Yeah. In the United States, we are explicit when we talk about space-based supply chains. Now that's going to gray a little bit, especially with $151 billion of funding coming through for Golden Dome. That interceptor sort of space-based interceptor network is going to significantly increase the necessity for commercial satellites that play a role in defense capabilities. We're talking maybe 2,000 to 3,000 total satellites in network if you're trying to just protect from a China attack. It expands dramatically if you start thinking North Korea, Russia. It changes the calculus substantially. So, when we're thinking about the United States, we do have a delineation between commercial and military functions. China doesn't have that. I have been a part, or it has been reported, I can neither confirm nor deny, but it has been reported by the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and every major press agency that I was involved in two major sort of revelations in the technology universe. One was if you Google Exiger and Huawei, you'll see who the Wall Street Journal said proffered the evidence around Huawei that had led to the eventual arrest of the CFO. And essentially, what Huawei was doing was they were rerouting U.S. equipment through China, through the Middle East, through Jebel Ali, and out to Iran. And then also, my good friends, Ashley Yablon was the general counsel of ZTE that turned state's evidence and had hired us to do the investigation. Us and DLA recused ourselves because we figured out that they were trying to lie to the United States government. We weren't going to be a part of it. And so Ashley turned state's evidence and broke open the whole thing. So between ZTE and Huawei, you can see that there is an active attack that is coordinated with state agencies to undermine the United States. Because if Huawei and ZTE were really weighing this on an economic basis, why would you consistently see companies trying to penetrate the smallest telecommunications market in the world outside of maybe Liechtenstein for the largest telecommunications? They're inherently undermining their profit motive. And why are they doing that? Because they want to undermine the United States. And so what you have in China is military-civil fusion between commercial space launch and satellite capabilities, and then even software capabilities with military efforts. So you basically have to assume that everything coming out of China is state-sponsored, that the intellectual property in partnerships is being shared directly with the state, and that IP is not being guarded. And you also have to assume that the software sharing, the software integration, the research that is happening on the Chinese commercial satellite side is being used in left of launch proactive analysis. And sorry, go ahead.
I would say you mentioned just a minute or two ago that you all had done a report recently on DeepSeek.
Yes.
The Chinese AI model that kind of captured the world's attention a few months ago.
Yeah.
And its ties with the PLA.
Yeah.
Right? So thinking about our space industry, how concerned ought our vendors and suppliers be about utilizing Chinese AI?
Yeah. So first of all, when you're in space, when you're trying to build an autonomous system, there are a number of ways that you can actually affect debris aversion, or you can affect sort of interconnectivity between satellites, or you can affect critical targeting techniques. And if you are putting AI into those systems, you need to think about at the beginning, from a model tuning perspective, even if it's open source, even if it's deployed on your own technology, have you potentially had a poison pill put into it that will be activated at a point in which, I mean, literally, there are some images that have been passed to our satellites and have been collected by our intel community that have had in them specific swap outs of certain images, and in those images you'll have the equivalent of a QR code in the topography to actually instigate a malware attack or a call home. So when you're thinking about model weights and tuning, you can have issues in deploying that technology, and it can wait for a specific instance, a specific interaction, a specific scenario, and that model can then disrupt that satellite's capabilities. The second thing is obviously anything with call home capabilities, anything with API infrastructure is going to be problematic. And then third, training data inherently or training or even access data, it's another way of fooling or breaking the models, right? Like the way that hackers test each version of AI as it comes out is they break context window. They've found that breaking context window allows you to manipulate the results that you're getting back from these LLMs on a consistent basis. They overload the context window, and then it allows them to manipulate and inject malware. And so, look, you have many ways in which your AI models, when put onto autonomous vehicles, put onto autonomous satellites, put onto launch systems, can be manipulated. And so then the question is, how was that AI built? Well, supposedly with $6 million and a few, ragtag folks, they launched DeepSeek. It's just not true. What we found was that first, at the base level, there was hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of funding going into injecting PLA-linked researchers into the research that was then flowing up into stacks like OpenAI and Gemini and others, right? So one, there was funding that was actually going into DeepSeek and IP transfer that was happening, but it was just all in the context of research and grants and subsidies and things like that, so you couldn't see it. The second thing is the investments that were being made into the technologies that were being utilized by DeepSeek, again, China state-linked. And so now, obviously, DeepSeek is being deployed as a military technology. Like, China has now said that. So there's no masquerading here. If you are using AI from countries that do not have your best interest at heart or don't have open practices, open principles, opacity is going to be your death, and they'll manipulate it, and it'll be just before something launches that you'll see those satellites go down.
Yeah, they may be cheaper, but buyer
right.
beware, right?
That's right.
Let's ask you to dive in a little bit more and unpack the economic warfare aspect of this. So, do you see evidence of China using predatory investment practices, manipulating intellectual property protections, or just outright IP theft related to their space companies, trying to advance their space companies over ours?
Yeah, we have many instances where we have had space companies that were in financial duress, and Chinese companies ended up picking up the assets. And you see that in everything from telemetry all the way up to full satellite technology companies. So one, you are seeing targeted acquisition of assets throughout the United States and ally supply chain, right? To subvert our ability to, in an economic way, because they know that that's what they're trying to target. They're trying to target the fact that our space programs, especially on the commercial side, have to be profitable.
Yeah.
And theirs don't, right? So they're trying to use that asymmetric leverage against us. The second thing is we know of outright IP theft. There's a case actually in Texas where a space company, a rocket company, just won a major lawsuit against AVIC, and that lawsuit named the CCP, and the money came from the CCP in China to pay off the IP theft case. And so the idea that AVIC or any of their subsidiaries or any of their ventures are independent of CCP it's laughable. And so we know that there is IP theft that's happening. Now, how are they doing it? They're getting into joint ventures, they're getting into research programs, just like they did with DeepSeek, and then they're doing transfer of technology. The last thing is I think China is using one of the last places where labor arbitrage might be a powerful advantage, even with AI, and that's in building huge non-kinetic forms of warfare, right? I mean, cyber attacks, exfiltration, penetration, sabotage, and espionage throughout our cyber stack is incredible, right? And so I think that there's a huge investment that's coming out of China to undermine our ability to defend and build a commercial space program and to defeat our aspirations of independence and security, both from a supply chain perspective and a military perspective. But here's just the last thing I want to say on that. The market has hit unprecedented highs several times this year. The AI race, it is driving stock speculation, it's driving fervor and enthusiasm about the potential growth that AI can produce for us. But really, for this to sustain for 10, 20 years, there does have to be other forms of production. For the first time in history, the stock markets don't equate to productive labor equivalents. AI is changing that dynamic. And so there's a long-term existential point, which is we have to get to space. to continue to grow, to continue to build, to continue to support humanity's potential physical and financial growth. And if the United States is undermined in getting there, China knows they win.
Brandon, I feel like we could go on for a whole hour on this topic, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for your insights today. Exiger is doing great work. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
After you.